Hey, folks, and welcome to Counter Clipping Show number 136 for August 14th, 2023. Tonight's topic is wargaming in ancient Rome. And I was pretty narrow when I picked that topic, when I picked games to talk about. And a lot of them are games we haven't really talked about before on this show. Yes, I got a haircut. It was about time. It was extremely overdue, to say the least. So, before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody to please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And if you'd like to do more to support the channel, there is the Patreon and the merch store and all those other things down linked in the video description. I'll also point out that the historical solitaire games poll, which is also linked in the video description, is still going on as of this recording. So if you haven't done that yet, please check that out. If you do any kind of solitaire historical gaming of any kind, it is a cool little survey that they're going to use to get some interesting data from. We are clipping Objective Moscow. So I have to give a big shout out to SW, who has been a longtime supporter of the show. And I knew he was sending me a goodie box with a couple things in it. And I'm like, I open it up and I'm like, there's been some mistake. There's been a clerical error. There's a copy of Objective Moscow in here. So that is a pricey collectible. Of course, if you pay pricey collectible prices, it usually comes in a box. This is in a Ziploc bag. So we're gonna go through it, and this is something I would like to play. And there's a chance that our face-to-face group might actually take us up on that at some point sooner or later. It's a neat looking game. And a game. It's kind of the anti-Fortress America, if you will. Except instead of America, it's the same idea, except it's wargamier because SPI did it, and it's the Soviet Union instead of the United States. So it's pretty neat looking, and it's also pretty big. So there's that. So let's see what we got here. So we're just counting counters for the moment to see if we have the correct number of each color. So we are going to, it's going to take a while to go through this, and you're probably going to see this off and on. Let me put it that way. Counter clipping storage. I got some storage things in the works. We did not have a lot of videos last week, but we may have an extra one either this week, late this week, or early next week. We'll announce that once the the date is firm. And we do have an unboxing video on Thursday, which is Battles in the East Volume 2 from Decision, which looks just as good as Volume 1, to be completely honest about it. So, we are... okay, so over the weekend, we learned that there is a COVID-positive person in the house. So, I am reasonably sure at this point that I have COVID number 4. And that's because my sense of taste has gone all crazy again. Doesn't appear to be affecting the whiskey. By the way, we are drinking, once again, Ardbeg Wee Beastie in an effort to clear some shelf space on that particular shelf. So now the Stegler, I've played Europa. I mean, and I can handle the stacking I mean, poorly. But it's not going to be worse stacking than Europa. I guarantee that. So there's that. Oh yeah, this is the my wife got me this, I think, for Christmas or my birthday or something like that. This is the Mensner cover basic set artwork. And it's a pretty cool t-shirt. It came weathered like this. It's a pre-weathered shirt. So I picked myself up a Yes shirt recently. So we're out of tests, and you can't get the tests for free anymore. So I'm just kind of assuming I got it at this point and taking the appropriate precautions. So what that means is that I did not get to go play last Blitzkrieg last week. And I might stay home this week too, because I don't really want to go sharing the COVID love again all over the place. So there's that. Now I did pick it up at Compass Expo last year, and that's only got like 150 people or something like that at it. So that was annoying. But you know, what can you really do? So video update, still haven't gotten the Mr. President video done, and I won't let myself take it down until I do that video. So I have an outline for it. I just haven't had the chance to to actually get it recorded. And um, truthfully, I've been working on the game, so we're gonna actually talk about that. As Rand points out, please thumbs up the video and all that. I've already said that. I'll say it again at the end of the session, I'm sure. So I don't know if there's some typos on these counters, or if they're supposed to be um, mechanized infantry on the backs of some weird counters. So I don't know. So you should probably not. You should probably wait a week or two to come over. It's going to take me a little extra time to get Objective Moscow clipped anyway. So there's that. So anyway, Patrick from Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, welcome back to the show. And put the banner up. We do have a link in the banner to the Discord, which is refreshed this week. I have put my contact email address in there in case anybody wants to get a hold of me. That is the way. I mean, I'll get to it sooner or later, unless somebody like sends me a private message on Consim World, in which case I'll see it, but it might be like a year and a half from now. So, because I don't check Consim World all that much, I don't never go there. But I don't go there all that often, and I am not in the habit, particularly, of checking the private messages there. And I've been known to miss them before. Um, BGG I visit every day, so there's that. BGG has its limitations as a wargaming resource, but it's still super valuable. So there we go. Perfidious Albion, we went broad but narrow. He has ancient Rome, Imperial, Republic, or Imperial, and I picked both, but I also left out games that are like Trireme, for example, that are kind of like all over the place, where there's some ancient Roman stuff and some ancient Greek stuff and whatever. I just stuck to the ancient Roman stuff, but we got at least one Byzantine, two Byzantine games in here as well. Actually, kind of three. So I do count that. So there's that. Well, we'll kind of talk our way through a lot of the period as we go here, and I didn't sort these in numerical order or anything like that, or chronological order, but we'll kind of talk our way through the period and some of the interesting history that surrounds some of these incidents, as we will see. I guess I kind of spilled the beans last week where I'm working on this game, and part of the motivation there was to motivate, like self motivation, to keep me working on it, and I have kept working on it. I do not necessarily intend to do these every week, but I have made quite a bit of progress. So here's something that probably won't need to change. This is the turn record track. I might add one or two things to it, but this is probably where it's something very similar to this is where it's gonna land. This is very straightforward. Um, There we go. There we go. There's the map in progress. It's coming along. It's been hard to do. I spent a lot of time doing the sea, but that's done now on the Europe map. The Asia map is barely started. I want to kind of get the Europe map in complete draft condition first. However, not all the terrain is in, as you could probably tell, but a decent chunk of it is, and all the rivers are in. There may, in fact, end up being too many rivers, and I might end up deleting some. But there's, you know, as these SPI counters usually clip okay, usually. But I do find that when dealing with SPI counters, I usually need a nail clipper or a pair of scissors handy just to clean up the occasional counter that doesn't clip right. So the Pacific map ain't on here yet. And that's, like I said, that's not in any different condition than it was last week. I did make icons for the terrain. I think they're differentiable, so they look amateurish, but they're differentiable, and that's more important. So, and then we did some in the process of developing kind of the counter layout and what information was going to be on the counters, because I had this information at my fingertips. I pretty much put together the entire Polish order of battle, as well. Now, most of this is 1939 order of battle, so bear that in mind. But I mean, it's going to look like the Third Reich map, because it's going to end up having more terrain on it than the Third Reich map. But I mean, it's the same basic area. And the optional maps will expand it so that it doesn't quite confine itself quite as much. Um, yeah, so I mean, my ability to make maps is about going to top out at the level of Fortress Europa, just for what it's worth. So, Joe Perez out of shoulder surgery. Glad to hear that. Hope you're feeling better with that, or hope you at least intend to feel better. I did use Inkscape as a McFud pucker, as I talked about last week. It's my go-to tool for any kind of graphics. Well, not any kind of graphics work, but I use it overwhelmingly more than any everything else put together. I will do if I just need to crop something, I'll just use Windows Photos because it's easy and it just opens in a double click. If I'm doing some kind of color adjustment or something like that, I will use GIMP. I don't have to do that very often, thank goodness, because I'm not very good at it. I've learned a couple new things about Inkscape in the meantime, and I've upgraded to the new Inkscape, which has this cool thing called font groups, which lets you keep your fonts organized, which is an enormous help. So because I've got like hundreds and hundreds of fonts. Yes, I talked about this William Aaron's bit last week, how you kind of have to regularize or you know what I'm saying. Kind of have to make the terrain fit the hex grid, which I think I more or less did, but compromises had to be made, right? So the Peloponnese, for example, looks a little weird because the sea that separates it from the rest of Greece has to be along hex sides, and it doesn't quite work that way, so I had to make some minor adjustments to make it fit. The Straits of Messina do not line up correctly across a hex side, so I had to move the entire island of Sicily about a third of a hex to the north. So a lot of weird little tweaks have to be made, but the important thing is that the spatial relationships between locations remain intact. And since the ocean going stuff is going to be handled by sea area rather than by hexes, um, I figure that's all basically going to come out in the wash, right? Now, the real professional people like John Madison here are using this tool called ArcGIS, which is like a professional map analysis tool. It's got an incredibly high learning curve, and I watched a couple tutorials and totally bounced. So there's a free open source alternative called QGIS, which I have downloaded and looked at and said, "Oh, anyway, so yeah, I haven't gotten very far with that. But if the time comes to make a final map projection, that is probably going to be a tool that's going to need to get leveraged, at least if I do it, and I'll have to learn how to do it. I got permission from the Godfather before I moved the Sicilians. So anyway, my grandfather, his parents came from Sicily, as it were. So anyway, progress has been made. I'm reasonably happy with the progress that's been made. Rules wise, I got about 3 pages of rules written, which are mostly the bullshit rules at the beginning that I think like, "Cow, the game is played with counters. They are square." That kind of stuff. But the sort of the core of the game is the operations. And I have a pretty firm idea of how that's going to work in my head, and I just need to write it down. So we'll see how that actually works. And I do actually want to print some playtest counters and fiddle with it and make sure that the balancing is right. Not like the final balance, but such that so I know what the appropriate ranges on the factors are going to be. So haven't gotten to the victory section yet. Copenhagen is across a strait from the rest of Denmark. Yes, that's true. There's also a strait at Gibraltar, and there's a strait at the Dardanelles. The Dardanelles, or is it the Bosporus? The Strait of Istanbul. I forget uh the Bosporus is the one on the Black Sea side, if I'm not mistaken. So I might be wrong about that. So we'll see if this turns into anything. But like I said, I have made pretty good progress in the last week. So and eventually I'll need to put it all in Vassal too, but because eventually I'm going to want somebody else to look at it besides me. But that's a ways away yet as well, and I'm going to need at least a draft counter mix to even do that, and I don't have that yet. I have literally the Polish counters that you've seen and some markers, and that's pretty much it. There will not be round counters, so that is just not going to happen. So, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with round counters. It's just that this is a game with hexes. And the hexes are tuned to be just a little oversized of what they would absolutely have to be, so that there's a little more room there. Stacking should be relatively manageable for the most part, but if you end up having like a land stack and then an air stack on top of that, you could have issues. So anyway, this there was an East. I'm pretty sure, Roger, I'm pretty sure you're right about this. But the game I'm thinking of when you said that was Thunder in the East. I'm sorry, Thunder in the East. And that did not have hex shaped counters to the best of my recollection. But it did have three different square counters, plus rectangular counters, plus triangular counters, plus round counters for the HQs. So there's like pretty much every conceivable counter shape makes an appearance in there, except hexagons, oddly enough. But anyway, yeah, there. I know there's at least a couple of games that do have hexagonal counters. Not incredibly common, but I have seen it. Anyway, so I don't have any like news this week, really. So let's get to the topic, and that means we turn this on. Right there, we go. All right, we're going to start. There was another one that actually came up first in the list here, and I didn't want to use it because I haven't played it, and I don't want to start the list off with something I have no idea what to make of. This I have played. This is Hannibal Rome versus Carthage. This is a Mark Simonich design, released originally by Avalon Hill. Did I have a year noted on this? In 1996. 1996 is what I got. So it's pretty late, Avalon Hill at that. They went away in 1998. Now, this has been an enduringly popular game, and having played it, I think it's okay. I think it is. Is it my least favorite Mark Simonich game? It might be. That's not to say it's bad. It's not at all. So this is the second Punic War, pretty much. And like I said, it's not a bad game. I just found it, it's point to point, it's card driven. It's got battle cards too, as I recall. Some of these games have the battle cards, some of them don't. So I think I'm getting that right about this one. And it was good. But it's a I didn't find it as engaging as Paths of Glory. Let me put it that way. It's less detailed than Paths of Glory, and that might be a factor. So um Meandering Mike mentions that the original Axis and Allies from Nova had counters instead of miniatures, and he is absolutely right. I've seen that on a table once. I've never played the original. The one I played to date, the only Axis and Allies that I've played is the original Milton Bradley Game Master Series Axis and Allies, and obviously that's been since the 80s, I would imagine. So it's been a long time, and therefore I have a hunch that it's changed since then, and I probably shouldn't say too much about it. But I did end up being of the opinion that it had some balance issues. Let me put it that way. That's an oversimplification. It's not exactly balance. It's one of those games that takes way longer to play than it does to decide who's going to win. And that's what I didn't like, and that's maybe sort of game balance, but not really. So, and that is why I have not been a huge fan of Axis and Allies. But that said, I know that Axis and Allies has changed fairly dramatically since that original edition. So I am reluctant to draw any broad sweeping conclusions about it. But yes, this is absolutely right. So anyway, Nordic Maelstrom is kind of snobbish when it comes to Napoleonic Wars. It feels the Library of Napoleonic Battles is the be all end all system. Um, I really like, as you probably know, I really like the Library of Napoleonic Battles, but it is good at a certain thing that it does, and if you want a different Napoleonic experience, let me put that a different way. If you want a Napoleonic game that's bringing something to the table that's not illuminated by that sort of weird grand tactical scale that the Library of Napoleonic Battles uses, then you're probably going to end up with something else. Now, the problem with Napoleonics is as we've talked about before, is that while there are a few Napoleonic operational games, there's not that many, and there is no like one that seems to be a lot of agreement is the best. Zucker's own operational series, I think, looks very interesting. I really need to get to play it. But as we'll see going through this list, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to get played. And that is somewhere on the list and not at the top. So we'll get to it at some point, and maybe I'll do video on it when that happens if we can actually get back into doing video. So that would be cool. Um, but anyway, Hannibal Rome versus Carthage. I thought it was pretty good. I think I rated it a 7 on BGG, which I think is, my pretty good rating. But I didn't give it an 8 because I didn't think it was quite that good. And like I said, I prefer most, at least, of the Zachbond games, and I definitely prefer the U.S. Civil War to this game amongst Mark Simonich games. He's a designer I have I like a lot. I think that's a very safe to say. And I haven't played them all, right? I haven't played all the Mark Simonich games, but of the ones I've played, I think this might be my least favorite. It's good. I just didn't think it was quite as good as everybody seems to think. So it's been redone, I believe, by Phalanx relatively recently. I believe that edition is bundled with Hamilcar, which is basically a parallel game, I believe, about the first Punic War or something like that, or maybe it's the third Punic War. And it's got fancy little miniatures and all that jazz. So if you're into that, that's cool. You can get a nice, cool edition. But I personally be very happy with the Avalon Hill edition if I needed a copy of this, which I do not have and don't particularly need. Would I play it again? Yeah, probably. I think I would. It's not a terrible game. That undersells it. I just didn't think it was quite as good. It did not live up to its reputation for me. Like I said, I thought it was good, but not great. All right, moving on is a game I do think is legitimately great. Now, this is the this is the original edition of SPQR. This is Richard Berg. And I had the name Roger in my head for some reason, and I managed to stop it, and that sounded like a dope. So Richard Berg and Mark Herman. Now, on the original Great Battles of Alexander, the way the design credits are given in that book is designed by Mark Herman and development by Richard Berg. And from hearing Mark talk about it, it sounds like that story was a little more complicated than that mere credit line might lead one to assume. And subsequent games in the series were always co-credited between the two of them, as far as I'm aware. We'll have an exception that's coming up here as well, too, though. So SPQR is tactical, Great Battles of History. And I tried not to double up on series, but there's at least one that I felt that I had to. And GBOH is one of them. I mean, it's the obvious one, right? So this is Tactical Ancients. It is focused on command and on the interplay of different weapon types and tactical systems. And it does a really, 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 really good job at that. If you play simple GBOH, you lose some of that detail in those aspects specifically. And that's one reason why I don't particularly like simple GBOH. Now, this is the original edition. There was 5 battles in this. In addition to that, there were at least 3 expansions to this thing. They later did a deluxe edition, which had... So this is complicated. So it had most of the expansion material in it. However, there were expansions that were intended that you could use either with SPQR or Great Battle of Julius Caesar. And there's at least one battle in one of those supplements that is not an ancient Roman battle. It is an ancient Greek battle. I think it's Raphia. And that got moved to, and I believe that was in War Elephant. I believe that got moved to Great Battles of Alexander Deluxe. And then there in SPQR Deluxe, you had a whole bunch of additional material. Now, the latest version, which I believe is 2018, do I have that right? Yeah, that's what I got here anyway, and that's what BGG said. And I think that sounds approximately correct. We'll have all of the expansion, other than the one battle from the one expansion that they put in Great Battles of Alexander. We'll have all the stuff from all of the expansions, including Barbarian. The first edition of Deluxe, SPQR Deluxe, or what I might call SPQR Super Deluxe, did not have Barbarian. It had all the other expansions. And Barbarian's got like 10 scenarios in it. So, or eight or 10 scenarios. It's very interesting. So a couple of things here is Perfidious Albion says that the SPQR Player's Guide is worth getting if you can find it. I have not found that the Player's Guide is particularly hard to get if you are good at getting out of print stuff. The trick is going to end up being to get the Player's Guide without necessarily buying an entire extra copy of the game. But then again, there are worse games to have extra copies of, I suppose. The one true plum, we're going to see this game later, so we might talk about that. Stigler says early experience with Men of Iron really reveals a lot of play balance issues. I think that's by design, to be honest, to some extent. I mean, in GBOH, they'll tell you right up front that, and I'm pretty sure those scenario notes are mostly Berg, just by the tone. I could be wrong about that. They will generally tell you which, how it's balanced. Some of them are well balanced, most of them are not particularly well balanced, but that was the nature of warfare in the ancient world. You wanted to fight in conditions that were favorable to you, and a lot of battles happened that way. So that's true. And a lot of the same GBOH is considerably more detailed than even simple GBOH is more detailed than Men of Iron. Men of Iron is definitely a cousin of GBOH, as is Musket and Pike, as is Jour de Gloire, as is a couple of other Berg efforts. But of all of those, I think that GBOH itself is the most complex of them. And I don't think it's crazy complicated by any means. So it is, the leadership system's a little weird. It takes a little bit of getting used to. But other than that, and there's also a lot more variation between games in the family than you might see in a tighter series. It's a fairly loose series. This is worth your time. Kenai in particular is a very interesting battle to play out. This is Hannibal against superior numbers of Romans, and he manages to win. It's very interesting, given the historical battle, to see how that plays out in the game. See if you can pull off what Hannibal pulled off. Apparently, this is on there. We are never going to reprint this list, and I'm not sure I agree with that, but I believe that's correct. I do, however, have everything other than every issue of C3I. Pretty much every issue of C3I has GBOH material in it. I don't have all of that, but a lot of that you can just download. And I have all of the other stuff. I have all of the expansions now. I mean, I was missing a couple of things, but they've reprinted a couple of things too. So War Galley's not that complicated either, as Just a Guard points out. The Roman games tend to be the more complicated ones because the Romans have a unique and interesting command system in GBOH that is noticeably, it's not like it massively overcomplicates the game, but it's like one of the more complicated parts that go into GBOH when you are dealing with the Roman command system. So some games that don't have that Roman command system, and Cataphract doesn't, and Alexander doesn't, and a bunch of other ones, pretty much all of them that don't deal with like Roman Republic or early Empire, pretty much don't have that. So I like this series a lot. I don't get to play it as much as I would like. We might fit it in as a fill-in game between big games at some point, or we might bust this out at Winterfest or something like that. Who knows? It's a great game system. The new SPQR Deluxe, which I didn't do this picture of, I think is the one to get if you're going to get SPQR, because it's got, instead of 5 scenarios, it's got like 20, I don't know, It's 20 plus, easily 20, maybe 25 plus scenarios. So it's a lot of stuff. All right, next up is more. There's a lot of Berg on this list, and bear in mind, there's not zero bias here, right? We're looking at games I have an opinion on, and Berg did a lot of Roman games, so we're going to talk a lot about Berg's games. This is Volume 1 of the Ancient World. Now, we did talk about this a few weeks ago. Volume 2 is Carthage, the First Punic War. And volume 3 was to have been Thunderbolt, the Second Punic War. That's the famous one with Hannibal and the elephants and all that stuff. And Berg passed away, and Alan Ray and Mark Herman said, we're going to finish Thunderbolt as a tribute to Richard Berg. And it is now on P500. It has made its number, I forget how fast, but it was pretty fast. So there wasn't a question about whether they're going to end up doing this or not. And I do know that Mark's been working on it for a while. He's posted a couple of pictures here and there of their progress. I have, yep, need one more. Trying to keep these in stacks of 10. Now there's, so Rise of the Roman Republic here is kind of an interesting game in a couple of ways. For one thing, it's operational ancients, which, as I've mentioned numerous times, you don't see that much of. There's a couple examples that we will see here on this list because I went out of my way to find those games, but probably all of the not quite, but a lot of the examples, a good percentage of the examples are going to end up being on this list, and we'll end up at least mentioning them tonight. So this is operational ancients, but you get this pretty robust political model for the Romans and then a different one for the Carthaginians. Okay. In the series, you don't really get the Carthaginian stuff in this volume. You get it in Carthage, the First Punic War. But Rise of the Roman Republic, Volume 1, is an interesting kind of hodgepodge of different scenarios, one of which is a Second Punic War, sort of a short Second Punic War scenario. The main event in this box is the Samnite Wars, and many people are not necessarily going to find that's like very early Roman history. A lot of people don't know a lot about that, and we frankly haven't really seen that much traffic on it. I forgot to say hello to everybody. Somebody should have said something. Somebody probably did say something, and I was ignoring it. So well, this isn't going to work well. I've only got like 7 people here. So hello to everybody that's here. So I'm sorry if I didn't read everybody's name. I'm going to look at the list right now. Stigler, Rob Johnson, Perfidious Albion, McFutt Pucker, Just to Guard, Alan Salazar, Mo from Mo's Game Table, Vicky, thanks for coming by, Meandering Mike, Kevin Featherly, whoever else I have forgotten to mention. So Stacking Limit is here as well. Tim Greenhaw. And Carl Crater from the War Game Boot Camp, Daniel Silverthorne just popped in. That's all Google's YouTube's giving me at the moment. So anyway, yeah, oops, forgot about that. That's kind of become a tradition to do that, and I just forgot it tonight. So I had a kind of stressful work day. Let me put it that way. So anyway, this is a super interesting system. It is very Bergian, and by Bergian, I mean that it is very chromy. You might find that you have a limited appetite for Berg levels of chrome, and this game series may turn you off for that reason. However, this is by no means the peak of Bergian excess. Okay, it's in my opinion completely manageable. I do feel fatigued for that matter as well. Just to guard, we're going to actually talk about. We're not going to talk about Genesis because it's not ancient Romans, but we will talk about Justinian as well. And another one that I had forgotten about that looks reasonably intriguing. So, so in any case, oh Jesus Christ, Marty, I keep meaning to ask it was exactly where shipment on this is because I haven't heard anything. And I thought they were saying June or July, and it's no longer June or July. So since Fucko here is asking, I'll blame him for badgering you about it. So if you don't have an answer, I understand. But if you do have an answer, spill it. So very interested in seeing that. But that's not what we're talking about here tonight. So Next up is Sword of Rome. This is Ray Farrell. Ray Farrell, is it Farrell or Farrell? I've always said Farrell. This is Sword of Rome. This is a 2004 release from GMT. This is a multiplayer game, and it's kind of different factions of the ancient Mediterranean world centered on Italy. And it feels to me somewhat artificially contrived. Let me put it that way. In an effort to make it a multiplayer game, we're going to see in a bit an effort that I think is a little more credible in this department. However, that said, as a multiplayer ancient Mediterranean world centered on Italy game, I think Sword of Rome is pretty good. Now, I have heard that it's the playing with the fifth player, which I have not done, is not satisfactory. I'm not sure what the issue is with that. Yeah, don't forget, as Stigler kind of mentions, but doesn't really say directly, don't forget that Richard Berg's affinity for Chrome gave us a lot of really great game systems over the years, many of which are not considered all that Chromey, and certainly not in their original Berg written incarnations. And I'm thinking of GBACW specifically. It's way chromier now than it used to be. Okay, so Marty says final components are being proofed. Box map counters are done in the warehouse. Booklets and charts are due to go to the printer by the end of the month. Okay, so should turn around pretty quick. Ship towards end of September. Well, you wait for quality sometimes. So yeah. So this covers like a huge period between in the third and fourth centuries BC, and so this is a quite early period. Again, this is before the Punic Wars. Tim Greenhouse says 5 works fine. So maybe I'm misremembering, or someone is full of it. That's plausible. And Marty says this is one of his all-time favorite CDGs. But he says it plays differently with 5 versus 4, which might be throwing some people off if they're kind of used to the 4-player dynamic, and then suddenly they got a 5th player in there and it changes. I can see how somebody might think that it might be busted, even if it isn't. So there's that. And or I could just be misremembering that too. That's very plausible. The Entering Mike says Genesis, which is not on the list tonight, but we'll read the comment, is interesting but doesn't flow as smoothly as he would like. Probably give it another try. I think Genesis is super interesting, but I don't think it flows quite as smoothly as Sword of Rome. Let me put it that way. Therefore, for that matter, as Pax Romana, at least for me, some people's experiences and opinions on that might be different. Tom MC, yes, Pax Romana is on the list. We'll get to that sooner or later. I didn't put Republic of Rome in here because I didn't think it fit with the rest of the stuff. So moving on, meaning it's kind of less wargamey than everything else on this list. That's kind of what I'm saying. So I picked this cover because it's a portrait cover and not a landscape cover like Imperium Romanum 3. But if you're going to get into this game, then you should probably get the new edition from Decision. Now, this is Imperium Romanum by Al Nofi or Nofi. I think it's Nofi because that's how Mark Harmon says it, and I'm going to defer to Mark on that. I've always said Nofi, but what the hell do I know? I've never met the man. This is his definitely wargame magnum opus. Released originally from West End Games as Imperium Romanum, and that was in 1979, and that looked pretty primitive. Imperium Romanum 2 was graphically definitely an improvement, certainly with the map, less so with the counters. The new Decision Games version is very nice. There are some handling challenges that aren't as big a deal as some people have made them out to be with the Decision version. And I don't want to get into too much detail on that, but in the West End versions, you had different factions. You had several different colored sets of counters. Okay, and you got, say, blue. You got blue leaders and blue units, and the blue leaders would be different than the green units or leaders, but the units would pretty much be the same. In the new version, the units are generic. So if the unit doesn't have a leader stacked on top of it, it can be challenging to figure out who that stack belongs to, but there are also control markers provided with the game on the backs of some of the leader counters even. So you can just use a control marker to figure out whose stack is who. So I don't think that's an incredibly serious complaint. Now, that said, this is a very challenging game, and I don't know if I've made this comparison on the show or not, but I'm gonna if I have, then I'll make it again, and if not, you'll hear it for the first time. The closest analog I can think of to Imperium Romanum, and we'll use Imperium Romanum 3 as the sort of baseline here, even though Volume 2 is 98% the same game. Um, the closest thing I can think is Pacific War. Okay, in that, it's kind of this big involved game. People kind of look at it and say, "Oh, where's the campaign game?" And well, there is a campaign game in Pacific War, but it's not about the campaign game. It's about the individual operational scenarios. Okay, some of which, just again, like in Pacific War, mechanically they aren't similar at all. So they are both fundamentally operational games rather than strategic games, and expecting a campaign game that covers the entire conflict, or in this case the entire history of the Roman Empire, would be, it's great that we have that as an option in Pacific War, but even I am not sure I'll ever play that. Now, the other way these are similar is that trying to keep these organized is that they both require intense dedication. Okay, require very careful reading of the rule books. It is going to take you time and significant effort to get good to, or even to play competently and feel comfortable with the rules to this game. There is a lot of bookkeeping as well. I think even though there's no like actual forms in Pacific War has got bookkeeping too in a way, because you really want to like take notes about what you've just detected in the various enemy task forces, particularly in the bigger scenarios. Okay, so they both have a lot of writing stuff down. In Meandering Mike mentions that um, well, BGG doesn't list developers, right? They sometimes list a developer as the designer, but that Greg Kostickian worked on this. It makes no is not surprising to me at all, because he was with West End back at roughly that, I don't know about 1979, but he was certainly well acquainted with West End. Remember, he did a bunch of RPG work for West End, and I think some war games too, for that matter. So, um, this is a really interesting and again, like Pacific War, there's really nothing else quite like it. And in the case of Imperium Romanum, in the case of Pacific War, I can at least say that the SPI war in the Pacific is kind of trying to do some of the same things. Kind of, I think Pacific War is a better instantiation of all of its ideas than War in the Pacific, but War in the Pacific has some interesting things to say on its own too. Whereas there's really nothing else quite like Imperium Romanum. There's really nothing like that. I do not have time, Mike, to look at that, to be honest. And it's inconsistent, right? So I can't trust it for these purposes. And I don't want to. I actually, for a couple of these, I actually looked up who the developer was. So by opening the game and looking at it. So there are some, I think, fairly minor rules tweaks in the Decision Edition, a huge graphical upgrade with 5/8 inch counters. Actually, I think they're 9/6. I think they might be 5/8 inch counters. But there are also half-inch counters. Some of the markers are half-inch as well. So the maps and counters are a huge upgrade. It is 3 maps instead of 2 or 1 2/3 maps, as was the case with Imperium Romanum 2. The rules are mostly the same. There's a couple of changes, and the new version has added a few scenarios. You are probably going to struggle. I think most people will have some level of struggle with the rule book, and I don't really think that it matters which edition of the rule book you're struggling with. I think you're going to have more or less the same issues either way. You are going to have to really love it to get into Imperium Romanum. Chris K, thanks for stopping by. So this is really interesting. Marty says, and I think somebody said this to me before, and Marty, it may have been you. If we like Republic of Rome, try John Company. John Company, I don't have, and it's a little pricey for. I don't want to say it's pricey for what it is because it's really the nice. The components are really nice, but it's pricey for a game I would buy. On that topic, I do, however, kind of want to play it, so that may happen at some point. Nofi did design a World War I game. It is called The Great War, and it was released by Compass. Is that correct? I think that's Compass. I don't think I'm right about that. It is called The Great Al Nafi's The Great War. Or Al Nofi's The Great War. So there are people that like the West End version, but I think a lot of people are sour on decision for for whatever reasons they have to do that. Yes, Meandering Mike. That is a one small step product. Um, I think the cover is reminiscent of a cover that Compass might do, and I think that's the only reason why I keep mentally thumbtacking it to Compass whenever I hear that brought up. I don't know if he did not do a ton of games, by the way, but I think the games that he did are interesting and noteworthy. Among which is Imperium Romanum, and to me that's the most interesting of his designs because of its just like sheer ambition. Um, he also did, I think, one of the scenarios out of Great War in the East, and a few other odds and ends. Um, the most recent thing he's done is definitely at least listed on BGG is this new version of Imperium Romanum. So there's that. I get the so there is no. So I left out that for the same reason I left out actually on the short list Conquest of the Empire, but I ended up leaving that out as well. And I've played Conquest of the Empire, and it's pretty good. But Eagle, as some Eagle Games is going to do, is going to be somewhere in that neighborhood. And I wanted to go a little deeper into the history and simulation angle here tonight, at least. Um, I will say, so I think I looked at Roma Victrix from Compass and said, oh, okay. And then we mentioned it on the show with Bill on Thursday, and I took a second look at it. I'm like, man, this is really ambitious. Now it's not quite as ambitious as Imperium Romanum, but it's still really ambitious because the nature of warfare and the nature of society and everything changed dramatically multiple times over the course of the Roman era, and it's going to be really interesting to see how a designer keeps up with that, or if they can. So, while Roma Victrix is not on this list because it's not out yet, then that's something to keep an eye on. I think Knights and Knaves, yes, that's on the list, but I don't really know anything about that. All right, whiskey's not that good for wetting the whistle. You know what I'm saying? Paul Sin, thanks for stopping by. All right, so moving right along, we have Pax Romana from Richard Berg. So this is Richard Berg card-driven game. I happen to think this is so. This kind of covers a period that I think a lot of us might find more interesting, where it starts in roughly 300 BC and goes to really kind of just before Julius Caesar becomes super duper prominent. Okay, and it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting design. It does have that proportional losses system that Berg seems to be particularly attached to, but which I don't. I find a little bit clumsy, but it's something you can handle, and there's a cheat table for it as well. So we had a. I'll talk about this a little bit without getting too much into it. I'll hit Gen Chaos 33. I'll hit this as well. So there was some pushback on Thursday's show with Bill Thomas from Compass Games, and Bill said some very Bill things, and people said, well, why didn't you push back on that? Well, that's kind of not what we're there for on that show. Now, I mean, I'll tell people what I think, but we're not really there to be antagonistic to the guests on that particular show. If I were going to do that, and I'd really rather somebody else do that, then it's a different show because then I'm subjecting Dan to potential hostility too. And I think Dan's a little tough little guy and can take it, but I still don't want to do that. So um the I Bill is Bill, and I appreciate that Bill is not giving you bullshit, and that's really what he thinks. He said some things that I don't agree with, but he can say what he wants, and I can say what I want, and maybe I'll say it in the same show, and I don't feel guilty about not having pushed back at him during that conversation. So now I will point out that it would have been trivially easy to push a large red button and get Bill to flip out, and I didn't do that. uh, and it didn't occur to me to do that until later when I said, I absolutely could have gone Bill gone fucking volcanic, and that would probably have accumulated lots of views and created lots of excitement and tooth gnashing and hand wringing. And I just don't want to do that. I don't want to be that kind of person. So we're not going to do that. And if we are going to have a all of the issues that were raised are worthy of conversation, and if we are going to have that conversation, then we need to have it with people with whom we can have that conversation, and who are going to bring themselves and some reasoned arguments and facts and stuff like that. So, so anyway, that's pretty much all I want to say about that again tonight. There's a big thread on Twitter. Go check that out if you want. So Gen Chaos says that Pacific War is two games in one. The full Pacific strategic game is all by itself, full monster, while the smaller stuff of the game, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but some of those campaign scenarios are themselves really big, right? Now, in terms of footprint, there's a lot bigger games than Pacific War, but in terms of time footprint, um, it's comparable to anything, I think. Any in the largest class of games or longest playing class of games. Now, I wouldn't consider. I could kind of see the logic here, right? There really are kind of two experiences in there. In that you have the meat of the box. What's in the box is the campaigns, and you don't take my word for it. That's what Mark says. The campaign scenarios, and I do think that the campaign scenarios are interesting, and some of them are extremely large. And you are going to have your hands more than full with that. Now, the strategic scenario, which is the one in which there's more than one, but that is when you are playing a strategic scenario, you are playing out the entire Pacific War for its entire duration from December 1941 to whenever. Um, the number of additional rules that you need for that is substantial. But if you have mastered the stuff that's in the game already, I don't think it's going to be particularly troublesome. The real hurdle between the campaign scenarios and the strategic scenario is just the amount of playtime you're talking about. That I forget what the scenario is called, but that scenario in late 1941, early 1942, where the Japanese are just running around conquering everything, and it's like a 3 or 4 month, maybe something like that scenario. Man, that scenario is huge, and that's going to take a long time to play. So just imagine that that's like the start of the campaign game, right? That would have taken us with the three players we had at the time. That would have taken us months to played through that scenario. So, well, right. I mean, Mike, it's not a debate show. I see value in a debate show. I am willing to participate in a debate show, but it is not that show. So, um, Roger, remind me who Chris Harding is. So, um, so on this particular point, I will both agree with Bill on it and disagree with Bill on it. There have been a couple of releases from other publishers pretty recently that released with significant problems and significant problems, and um, there's not really that much flack about it. Um, However, as I mentioned on Twitter, uh, we live in this like sort of weird world of internet siloing, right? I don't think Bill is aware of the conversation happening on such and such a goofball bulletin board that Pacific War, not Pacific War, Mr. President was, and I quote, unplayable and unplay tested. And that's no, it's that neither of those things is true, and anybody that thinks that's true is at best mistaken and at worst operating under an agenda, and they're being disingenuous because neither of those things is actually true. It is not flawless. There are some issues, but which we'll get to if I ever do the video. But that that kind of talk does happen. I've heard very negative things about Clash of Sovereigns, for example. So okay, very good. Thank you, Mo and Roger for that extra information. Was that Panther Games? Is that Panther Games? Were they Australians? Well, Bill is very Bill, right? Bill is Bill, and we knew what we knew. We have been not so much Dan, but I knew what we were getting when Dan said, "Hey, should I ask Bill Thomas?" And I'm like, "Yeah, ask Bill Thomas. That'd be great." I don't think he'll say yes, and he did. So, um, there's plenty of stuff coming out of Compass that's as good as the good stuff from anybody else, and there's some sloppy stuff coming out of Compass that is as sloppy as the sloppy stuff coming out elsewhere. So I think they are, however, I think an important point that needs to be recognized is when somebody or an organization in this case has been bitched at, and or what even if they haven't, they've been made aware of a situation, whether it was bitching or not, and are maybe behind schedule, trying to be better about it. And I do think that Compass is trying to be better about it. They are doing additional playtesting passes and stuff like that now that I don't know if they were doing before, at least in some cases. And I think we've seen the dividends of that. And frankly, uh, Decision Games is doing the same thing, right? They've had some significant quality issues in the past. And you've seen their pipeline slow way down in the last several years, and I'm convinced that that's why. The really recent stuff out of Decision has that I've seen has struck me as a noticeable improvement in quality across the board. That's less true of the magazines because the magazines are still susceptible to the magazine publishing schedule, and sometimes games get rushed. And the magazine's good, but the games they've always been hit and miss. I don't imagine that that's going to change. So well, a couple. I mean, Mark Walker's been on some shows, and Uva's been on some shows. And David Heath has been on some shows. So there's a few examples, but it's unusual, right? So in any case, all right, John Madison, you had it was more than a maybe that wasn't yours, but you guys had a copy of Fall Blau on the table at Winterfest in February. So I don't know if that was yours or not. And I think we're talking about doing a more likely Kharkov battles, but it's the same system scenario as a side thing at Winterfest, and I would be completely on board with that. And Bill is not the only person Bill put it differently than other folks have, but Bill's not the only person that has said something along similar lines about the economics of printing in the U.S. versus printing in China. That so many publishers are telling us that should tell us something, right? And so we should take that in context. So the GMT, I will say, I mean, this is probably my biggest complaint with GMT at this very moment, is that their pipeline is backed up very, very significantly. It has been for a long time, and I don't see that. I don't see that changing anytime soon, unless they just decide. I think they're trying to make an effort to do that too, but trying to kind of speed things up. But I'm not sure it's going to be that effective. In any case, I like Pax Romana, but as somebody said up front, it is very Bergian. It is more Bergian than a couple of the other Berg things that we've talked about. And for that matter, I think it's Bergier than the ancient world. Some people might disagree with that, but I feel like the ancient world's Chrome adds cool stuff. A lot of this, I think, could be more of this game could be streamlined. I see more more opportunities for streamlining here than I do in the ancient world. Well, without getting super duper into it, it's not only cheaper in China, but there's like stuff that is just simply not practical to have printed domestically anymore. Remounted boards were the example that were provided during that interview. I would love to talk to Roger. I got to make that happen, and Roger's got to make that happen, and it's on me to ask him. So I haven't done that, but that's a good call. I'd be happy to talk to Roger. All right, next up is Caesar's Legions. This is a game with a fairly interesting history, and I have a copy thanks to Mark Ruggiero. So thank you, Mark, for sending me this copy of Caesar's. Well, not this copy, but the copy of Caesar's Legions. It's out back on the shelf. As mentioned previously, this is an operational game, and those are unusual. Now, there's two different editions of this. There's this one that you're seeing the picture of here. This is the Avalon Hill edition, which is sort of very interesting, very dark magenta cover. It's not a bad cover. It's just the kind of an interesting choice of lack of contrast. But it was originally published as a game called Eagles, designed by Lauren Wiseman in 1974 and published by Game Designers Workshop. And I don't think very many games made that transition from Game Designers Workshop to Avalon Hill. This might be the only one. And I'm not sure that Lauren Wiseman had any other credits from Avalon Hill either, although I might be wrong about that as well. Of the major publishers, MM is absolutely printing in the US. And that I am unwilling to make assumptions about what the actual numbers are. About like how many dollars per game more it costs to do that. I don't have that information, and I'm told it's higher. I'm willing to accept that because I've heard that from many people. But I don't know to what extent that is a factor in MMP's prices. I have generally felt well served by MMP's delivery of value for the price I pay for their games, even though their games are, if you just look at, okay, this game has 2 maps, 2 counter sheets, and 2 books. That's probably a $60 game, not mounted map, probably a $60 game from GMT. From MMP, it's probably a $120 or $140 game. That's a significant difference. But again, I have not generally felt boned by MMPs. You know, when all is said and done and we've played the thing, I have generally been really happy with MMP stuff. So from the standpoint of dollars per hour of entertainment value, I have zero complaints about that out of MMP. And if you spread the extra $60 out among the 100 hours we played, then it's suddenly 60 cents an hour and it seems like a great bargain. So, um, John Madison was lucky enough to work for GDW for a while back in whatever podunk town in Illinois they were in. So cool. But I wasn't there. So, but it's cool. It's cool. John's got some cool stories about that. So, Joel says MMP counters are a bit small for SCS generally. So SCS counters are, with the exception of Autumn for Barbarossa, their counters for SCS have always been half-inch counters. Half-inch counters by themselves don't bother me. But if like they're really info dense counters, then it can be a problem if they get too cluttered or stuff gets printed too small or similar issues. So if you should definitely check out Autumn for Barbarossa if you're into SCS. It does have, I believe, 5/8 inch counters as well. So MMP's got their issues too, right? They did do the whole, oh shit, we forgot to put the player aids in the Ardennes 2 boxes. Oh, poop, 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 poop. Oh, and they didn't get printed. We got to wait for them to come back in the printer. Oh, we forgot to get the maps trimmed for on to Richmond 2. Oh, geez. Oh, my. So, they've had their stories too. They've done the right thing, which is to get it fixed and okay. And unless the publisher is going to say, well, screw you guys, which has happened, not by not by any of the companies. Okay, that's not true, but not by MMP, GMT, or Compass. Where they've just said, well, sorry, you're out of luck. The they've done the right thing and fixed any physical component problem or whatever, and you could play with the right components. And it's in terms of game value, right? That the game value is its own kind of variable, right? I mean, you can fix the physical problems even if you got to make damn corrected counters yourself. But that's independent of the value of the gameplay. I think not entirely independent, but somewhat independent. John, I'd have to check and see what Crimea's pre-order price is. I think 90 or so is the pre-order price, and maybe 120. That does sound small, but you know what? I'm gonna play that. So who cares? I mean, I'm gonna get 40 hours of play out of that. And for $1.50 an hour of entertainment, who cares? I don't think that's much of a problem. So okay, so Perfidious Albion says recommends that MMP mixes their volumes both domestic and offshore to optimize their costs. Reprints done domestically probably make more sense. So MMP makes a point to print in the US, right? It is they are not deciding that because they have the secret sauce that makes it cheaper. I guess I don't know that for a fact, but I'm willing to make that assumption. They print in the US because they have chosen to print in the US, and I can respect that decision. I approve of that decision, but I don't feel comfortable complaining about other companies that have made a different decision when it doesn't make economic sense for them. MMP has never done a mounted map, and they have done relatively few games that would warrant a mounted map. So when you start talking about stuff like that, then it becomes much more economical to print overseas. So all right. I also feel like the game, this is not MMP, this is the gamers, like that their setup lists could be better. They could be formatted better. I will agree with that. This is absolutely right. I hesitate to compare it to 1776 because scale depends on topic, right? So a game that is operational for World War II might be a battalion or division level game. Game that is operational for Vietnam is going to be a company level game, maybe a battalion level game. So there's that. Um, So GenCast 33 mentions MMP's maps, and this is something very similar that Stigler has said as well. So I'm gonna again draw the distinction here that the MMP from a development standpoint is really kind of several different groups that all happen to publish through MMP. Okay. There's like the ASL people, and then there's the GCACW people, and then there's the gamers people, and then there's some other people. Okay. And they might be in their own little pods as well, but these are the groups that I know about. So when people say this, they invariably are referring to the gamers maps specifically. They are workmanlike. I won't say they're aesthetically beautiful. And some of the older ones are not aesthetically beautiful, if you know what I'm saying. But the more recent Dean maps for OCS and SCS and Line of Battle specifically, I have been reasonably pleased with. They are always very clear and functional. And I do not find them to be particularly ugly. And certainly, unless you're going to complain that they're not mounted, which is sometimes maybe a practical consideration, but sometimes it's not. Especially when you're talking about games this size. I mean, you're going to print a 5 map game. Nobody but ADG has done that. Let me put it that way. So here's Shigler with this hobby horse on this hobby horse again. Um, these are not design errors. These are aesthetic choices of which you disapprove, and that's fine. But that is what they are. They are perfectly usable maps. Now, there are aesthetic choices made on, like I said, on some of the earlier gamers maps. I mean, if you bust out some of those early Civil War Brigade series maps, they're like, or even TCS, like, the color choice is killing me. My eyes are on fire and bleeding. But that none of that is recent stuff. So, and I have no problem with the hex numbering at all. You get used to that in 5 minutes. You are not going to actually like laser in on hex 1218 instantly. You're going to go to 1210 and count up. So that actually makes it a little easier to read, in my opinion. So, anyway, we've been on an MMP rant here. I think we're done talking about Caesar's Legions. And Mark Hodgkinson loves the OCS maps. I appreciate that they are them for their clarity. They are not the most aesthetically pleasing maps, but I don't find them ugly. And I'm talking about kind of all the OCS maps. And any recent SCS line of battle, other Dean, and we're talking about Dean's maps here, right? For the most part, there is now. I have complained about the map in the Bay of Days. I don't like that map. That's a Nico Scooby map. I like everything else I've seen that he has done. I don't like that map. I think it is ugly and hard to use. It is not a design error because it doesn't create any actual problems. You just think it's ugly. It is not a design error if it doesn't create any issues. And this is true. Some OCS maps are better than others, but actually, I think the problem there's some contrast issues on the deck counters. We talked about this though. Oh, so there's specifically an issue in Smolensk, but sometimes these are choices made by the designer or cartographer and not errors per se. To make the game work, a rail line might run in a slightly different way than it did historically. That's possible, and I think that's a legitimate choice by the I did, but I didn't have enough examples, and it was lame. So maybe, but MMP also does now. Again, not the gamers. MMP does my favorite wargaming maps, the GCACW maps. So I also think the game doesn't work all that well. I think it's just a scale mismatch of what SCS is good at, and there's nothing wrong with SCS, and there's certainly nothing wrong with Normandy. It's one of my favorite topics. But I think there's just this two great tastes that don't taste to get great together in that particular case. So, all right, moving on. Falling Sky. This is Volko and Andrew Runke. This is the Gallic Revolt against Caesar. This is a coin game. I picked this kind of because it's kind of different than all the other stuff we're doing here. There's a choice here to treat this Gallic war, which Caesar certainly saw as a war, as an insurgency in coin terms. And I think there's some that leads you or leads the game to have some interesting things to say that one might meaningfully compare to say what Caesar had to say about it. Because one of the best sources that we have for the Gallic Wars is actually Caesar's record of them, right? This is, I'll be honest, I have this and I'm probably not getting rid of it, but this is one of my least favorite going games. I think it's kind of flat. And that's despite really liking the topic, or really liking the era anyway. And I just found it kind of flat. I think that a game I almost put in here, and then I caught myself because it doesn't fit the theme of the show. Pendragon, which is post-Roman Britain. That's why it didn't fit with the show. I think that is to me a much more interesting game. Revolution Games components are good. They're unmounted maps. Their counter quality is good. Their rule books, they could use a better rule book layout person. Let me put it that way. But it's not a problem. It's just it doesn't look as sharp as it could. So so there's that. Stigler so part of my issue with what Stigler says here is he always says MMP when he really means the gamers, right? A lot of the other maps from out of MMP that aren't the gamers, most of which is done by Dean, are very different in style, and some of which may meet or exceed his high standards of artistic uh, flavor. So in any case, Falling Sky, it's a pretty decent game. Time of Crisis. This is Ray Farrell and Brad Johnson. This is a card driven game about the crisis of the third century. And the crisis of the third century is a very interesting period. More Chinese paratroopers. The counters we're clipping are the Chinese People's Republic of China, by the way. I didn't know that about Perryville, E4 Airmen. I don't have that many Revolution games, but I've got a number of them, and I've been pretty happy with the ones that I have. So, including all of the Blind Swords games other than Perryville, actually. John Z from the sunny Philippines. We have done Sword of Rome. I didn't get Barbarians at the Gates because I haven't played it. And I didn't have anything meaningful to say about it. But Barbarians at the Gate from Compass 2 or 3 years ago. I have an unboxing video of it and have not really given it any further look. However, a number of people have said they really, really, really like it. So I will take their word for that until such time as I can get to it. Um it is a point-to-point card-driven game along this a similar model to Paths of Glory. I will say that. Tim Zale says Falling Sky is his favorite coin. Now, to me, this is always true, but I feel like it's more true with coin than with other game series. I really have to be into the topic, and I just am not hooked by Falling Skies expression of its topic. So no, Andrew Cook, and I think this is absolutely right because this might be why I didn't like it. It is I'm really disinclined to get into the endless and valueless argument about what is and what isn't a war game and exactly where I, as opposed to somebody else, wants to draw that line. It is close enough to our space that I don't think it matters. But it doesn't play like a war game. And to me, that is more important. This feels to me like I have in the past said the word Euro here, and I'm trying not to do that because the term Euro doesn't have really a cleaner definition than wargame does. But what I see in Sword of Rome is something very similar to what I see in Barracks Emperors, which is a mechanic in search of a topic. Oh, this looks good. We'll put this topic on it. And that is not a design, and it's not that has never worked for me. But it is not a design methodology that I favor as a player or consumer. I can think of examples where, yeah, that's totally what this game is, and it's great anyway. And I'm very happy to do that. I mean, Lords of Waterdeep is like that too, right? So there are examples where I think it's totally fine, but on the other hand, there are other examples where I just it's not my favorite way to approach designing a game. John Stanley says the Revolution Games Perryville error is on the spare counters. John, thank you for the support. Much appreciated. Much appreciated indeed. Spare counters for what? Spare counters for Perryville or for something else? Because if that's the case, then maybe I don't even care. So, as John C mentions, he was playing Sword of Rome when I ran into him at WBC. Mo says Time of Crisis was boring as hell. It's a deck building Euro strategy game. Lots of people like it because it's pretty easy to play, but didn't feel connected to the theme. This was basically my issue. It didn't feel like it evoked the crisis of the third century, which I have read more than zero about. I'm not like an expert, but I mean, we did this in one of my Roman history classes. So I I know a little bit about the subject, and I didn't feel that subject was evoked effectively by Time of Crisis. Would I play Time of Crisis again if given the opportunity? Almost certainly yes. I would give it another shot. And then if I still hated it, then I didn't hate it. I just thought it was flat. I thought it was not as evocative as I had hoped. Um hmm. Well, this is the Perryville game. Um You know what though? I feel like uh I'm missing too much stuff here in the chat. Uh this is absolutely a thing you can totally say about Lords of Waterdeep. It is a straight up worker placement game with a couple additional knobs and wells and whistles. And it is tremendous fun. And I think they actually did a really good job of sort of bringing that mechanic to life by using evocative Forgotten Realms material. I felt like it does a very good job at that. Speaking of Forgotten Realms, I'm hearing very good things about Baldur's Gate 3, and I will probably pick it up at some point later when it is on sale. I do not have the money for it right now. John C from the sunny Philippines, thank you so much. It's going to rain all week here, so no yard work for me, I suppose. I mean that's good and bad, right? So the support is also much appreciated. I had a branch fall down. It was a pretty big branch, about 8 inches across, something like that. It fell off one of the big oak trees while I was back there in the backyard. I wasn't like right under it or anything, obviously, but yeah, it was a little startling. The dog was startled too. So there's that. All right. In any case, I bought Lords of Waterdeep. I like Lords of Waterdeep that much. So all right, moving on. Spartacus. This is John Fearer's Spartacus. This is another point to point game. John Fearer seems to specialize in point to point card driven games. This is one. This is from Compass. I have not really heard a lot about this, um, but it's got a fairly dense point to point map that I can see. I'd be curious if anybody knows a whole lot about this. This doesn't seem to have gotten a lot of attention, and I think that's probably unfortunate. On the other hand, maybe it's the cover, which is just kind of very tan. And I'm not sure. Oh, that was an entire tree. This is just a branch, and this was like in the back, so this didn't like fall, crush anything. So I can just pick this up. It's not a big deal. What chart is missing? If there's a missing chart, is it something you can just download? Because I'd be like, that's unfortunate, and they should fix it. But I wouldn't get terribly upset about that. Ooh. So Perry Sparopoulos. Yeah, yes, but I want to qualify this in saying that uh they have similar levels of playability. I think Blind Swords is simpler actually than the Hexasim Eagles of France. But they're not similar really in any respect other than the fact that they're both very playable. So in any case, Vault of Dragons. Um I'm not sure I've seen that one. I played one of the other ones. I forget which one it was. One of the Wizards D&D board games, and it was basically Axis and Allies with dragons. And it was fine. It was fine. But I didn't go out and buy it. Let me put it that way. I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'd rather just play Axis and Allies. So yeah, I'd say I think that's justified, but it's just a very beige cover, and beige is not a cover the color that it's just not punchy. And I don't know. John B. Fuhrer has done some very good designs, and he's done some stuff that maybe needed to get a little baked a little bit more too. So there's that. K Bar 54. Don't know if we commented on Hands in the Sea. I've heard good things about Hands in the Sea, but my I would try it if somebody brought it and said, "Hey, want to try Hands in the Sea?" I would be happy to try it. But for the reason you describe in this comment, I am not going to go pick it up based on that because I think I probably wouldn't like it. Now I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, so I'd be delighted to be wrong. But right now, I don't. Also, I don't like the cover, but that's also trivial. If I like the game, I don't really care too much about the cover. So there's that. You'd think Spartacus would be about the Servile Wars, wouldn't you? So, in any case, yeah. So my full price computer game budget for the year is sucked up by Starfield. So, I'll wait for Baldur's Gate 3, and it doesn't matter. I could play it in 3 years and it'll be fine. So, all right, we got to move here, folks. So next up is SPQR Deluxe. We already talked about this. I don't need to talk about it again. I'm not sure why I got it twice. But this is the cover to look for. You want second edition on the bottom right there as well, because that's going to be the one that has the scenarios from Barbarian in it. Wars of Marcus Aurelius. We do have a few solitaire games, explicitly solitaire games in here. Really striking cover here, I think. And I'm not sure who's doing the covers for Hollandspiel, but I generally speaking think the covers have been really striking and really leverage um minimal tool art, right? It's very Simonson-esque in a way. Um, and now I'm not sure that the topic here is quite as interesting because there's a bunch of fighting of Germans along the Danube frontier, right? So it's pretty much I'm not sure that it's quite as interesting as it warrants an initial game as a discrete game for it. Unlike the game we're going to get to in a couple minutes here. Despite that, the game has been fairly well received, and I would like to get this on a table at some point. It's not uninteresting history, and that playing the game might illuminate that history a little bit and make it obvious that it is more interesting than I think it is. If you're curious about the era, that big battle at the beginning of Gladiator, that's basically in this period, right at the end of it, because Marcus Aurelius is about to get smothered with a pillow, which did not happen historically, by the way. And I really like this cover too. So this is a Robert Dulesky game, and I have this one. I just haven't played it. Carthage, the First Punic War. This is volume 2 in the Ancient World series. Volume 3 is forthcoming in the form of Thunderbolt. And if you get Thunderbolt Deluxe, then you will get the first 2 games in the series as well in the same box. So this is the First Punic War, which is, I think, more interesting than people realize, but less well known and popular than the Second Punic War with the elephants in the Alps and all Cannae and all that stuff. I think there's a real solid game in here. And this is the one that has a real expression of the naval game too, because there is a struggle for naval supremacy in the First Punic War that Rome actually manages to pretty much outproduce the Carthaginians. So, ooh, nice. Yes, that is theft. That price right there. Not every Hollandspiel. I believe John's talking about this cover. I totally agree here. I think this is an extremely striking cover, and I think it's really effective. Not every Hollandspiel cover has been quite this good, but more often than not, they're pretty strong. There's a lot. I told you at the front of the show there's going to be a lot of Berg games in here because it's my list, and these are games I have, generally speaking, something to say about. Um, so yes, this is another Berg game. This is where you get the full impact of the Carthaginian political system on top of the Roman one, as opposed to the little short truncated Thunderbolt scenario in the first one. And you get the whole First Punic War here, and it's a 2-map game, kind of a map and a half, but it's kind of a 2-map game. There's a lot of meat here. You can, I think, get a lot of good play out of this. And I think it's a fascinating game system. So I know I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I'm not sure I haven't said it tonight. back in the say mid 90s when I decided, might have been the early 2000s thinking about it, when I decided, nobody's doing this wargaming thing anymore. I'm going to get rid of most of these games. I might have said all at the time. So I didn't get rid of all of them. I got rid of some. Um, Maybe most actually. But one of the few things that I didn't get rid of was this series because I said to myself, you know what? I could solitaire these things at some point. I think this is a really great system. Now, I think in retrospect, I do see it more issues with these games in the sense of their Bergianism than I necessarily thought was obvious back in the 90s when I bought them. But even so, I still think they're really good. And they're games on topics and scales that we don't see very often. So okay, now here's an interesting piece, and I think Justigard might have mentioned this as well. This is Cataphract. Um, just looking at the battles here. Okay. So, very interesting selection of battles from the Byzantine era. Now, as I've mentioned before, and as I hope everybody knows, the Byzantines never referred to themselves or thought of themselves as Byzantines. They thought of themselves as Romans, and they called their country Romania, which is where we get the word Romania from, right? And yes, after a while, they spoke almost exclusively Greek, but that doesn't change the fact that they never stopped thinking of themselves as Romans. And while if you look at various points in the Byzantine period, you see a culture that looks quite different in a lot of ways from the culture of the Roman Republic. There's nevertheless an unbroken chain of continuity between the Roman Republic and what it had going on, and the Byzantine Empire and what it had going on. So there's a it's the same. Ooh, shit! It's the same history. It's I'm trying not to mix these up. Now, here's the interesting thing here. So this is a Great Battles of History game, and it's got what was that 8 battles, 7, 8 battles, something like that. 7, 8 battles, some of which are kind of whitewashes historically, and some of which are quite interesting. Um, but the other interesting thing that is here is a complete additional game called Justinian. Now, this is the game itself, the Cataphract package, the GBOH part of it, is a Mark Herman and Richard Berg effort. I think I am really fatigued because I'm having trouble saying Mark Herman. And I can't think of any reason why that would be the case other than it must be COVID. Um, so you get, and I believe it can. I've never played Justinian, but I believe it can be used as a campaign game frame for the tactical game, and I think that's very interesting. And I'd be curious to know how well Berg pulled that off. The game itself is a point-to-point game. Looks pretty pretty lean by Berg standards. Let me put it that way. Yeah, this is true too. Actually, Justigard points out that there's a naval scenario that they want you to have war galley as well. Um, and there's also a naval scenario or two in. It was originally in Caesar Conquest of Gaul, but it's in the new Great Battles of Julius Caesar. Now there is also a Great Battles of Spartacus expansion that appeared in C3I at some point in the distant past. Good luck finding that. That'd be cool, and you do get some special counters for gladiators and Spartacus and stuff like that. Um, yeah, apparently, yeah. So there's that. This is true. Yep, it's areas. He's absolutely right. Some of these are area games. And the Vandals in North Africa as well. So Emperor Justinian is a real interesting character. His reign is really well documented, much better than we typically find, because this fellow Procopius was so if nothing else, Justinian's a good judge of talent, right? And not necessarily a great judge of loyalty, but a great judge of talent. And finds this really talented general Belisarius and sends him to reconquer the Western Roman Empire. Only he doesn't send very many men with him. So they manage to retake North Africa, and then they go on to Italy, and he just doesn't have enough men to deal with this situation. The whole Justinian and Belisarius dynamic is very interesting. This guy Procopius is Belisarius's aide, so he published some appropriately hagiographical works praising Justinian and praising Belisarius, but he also wrote The Secret History, which literally every horror show level scurrilous rumor gets reported about um, Justinian and his wife and Belisarius and his wife, and everybody's a prick behind the scenes. So I think it's important to take The Secret History with a grain of salt, but it's interesting history, and between the two of those different works of Procopius, we got a lot about Justinian. So Justinian attempts to reconquer the lost Western Roman Empire, which is partially successful, but it can't last for a number of reasons. One reason is that he did not send enough men to deal with it. Two is the empire is friggin' broke for a couple of reasons. One, Justinian's spending a lot of money doing all this stuff, and second, he keeps paying off the Persians. He keeps paying exorbitant amounts of 10,000 pounds of gold to the Persians to leave him alone so he can go reconquer the Western Roman Empire. And then there's the Justinianic plague, which is probably either the Black Death or smallpox. I think it's the Black Death. That's hypothetical, but I don't think, did I write a paper on this? I might have. But that's hypothetical that it's the Black Plague. I'm not sure we know that for certain, but it was bad. Okay, it was real bad, and like 2/3 of the population of Constantinople is friggin' dead, and it keeps coming back. Every 20 or so years, the inherited immunity kind of lessens, and the plague comes back. It's a plague spread by fleas that live on the backs of rodents. So anyway, there's two minis from Decision. One is called Caesar's War, and it's in Gaul, and one is called Belisarius's War, and they are super adorable, tiny little point to point, as I recall, card driven games with like 12 cards in them. They're really cute. They don't take a long time to play. They're terrific, easy games with like 4 pages of rules. They're not super satisfying for people that are going to go play Case Blue on the weekend, but they're really actually pretty neat. Both of those. Yeah. So I mean, this is true. There's not enough Byzantine forces there to enforce their control over it. And consequently, Goths keep coming in, Franks keep coming in, all kinds of trouble keeps happening, and they can't hold it on. They can't hold it. Italy is friggin' wrecked for centuries afterwards. So I have not actually watched that stuff on from Kings and Generals, but they do some cool stuff. Well, now you know. Now you know. All right. So moving right along. Stilicho, Last of the Romans. So this is a period. This is also again in that very late period. So Stilicho is a Vandal general, I believe. I believe it's Vandal, who pretty much single-handedly holds the Western Empire together for several decades until he is assassinated by some clowns. And they're like, oh shit, we killed the only thing that was holding the Western Roman Empire together. And it did not last that long after Stilicho was killed. So this is very interesting history, and I don't have this one. I probably should pick it up. I'm very curious to see what this game not what it looks like, because I've seen pictures of it, but this is very interesting history, and Dulesky has done some very interesting things. So this would be cool. This would be cool. I would be very interested in this, just a guard. So Yeah, but they'll suck up to whoever's in charge, right? Your army walked in, yeah, you're great, we love you, and then you get, the then there's a breach in the walls, and somebody else marches in. Oh, oh no, we love you. We were just we hated those other people. We just didn't want to die. So anyway, this is another solitaire game from Mr. Dulesky. Another, and this is we got a string of Hollandspiel solitaires here. So this we have Aurelian Restorer of the World, and this is an Amabel Holland design. Aurelian is the guy who kind of comes along in the wake of the crisis of the third century, and is one of a couple of people who really kind of stitches the Roman Empire back together and makes it last for another couple of hundred years. Even though it sure looked like it was going to shit, like presently, right at the end of the third century. So, um, so Aurelian is one of those guys. There's another situation where Aurelian does all this great stuff and then is assassinated by some men who then say, "Oh fuck, we assassinated Aurelian. What do we do now?" Now for there's sort of a happy ending, but it's only a temporary happy ending because there are no happy endings in the Roman world. So eventually, on top, in the wake of Aurelian getting killed, Diocletian takes over, and Diocletian stabilizes everything until he retires, and then everything goes to shit again. But the political situation has been stabilized enough that the empire doesn't disintegrate at that point. So, all right, I don't know if this is the last one or not. Rome Inc. by Philip Jelly. I'm told it's Jelly. I assumed it was Philippe Jelly, and that he was a Frenchman of refined palate. But I'm told he's a Brit, and therefore he is Philip Jelly. Now, I'm also told so. I was slightly off put by the title. It's like, run the Roman Empire like you would run a corporation. I'm like, I believe that's a fairly strained analogy personally. So, however, that said, I don't think the game actually really does that. I think it's just an interesting solitaire run the Roman Empire for 100 years type of situation. This was very successful from against the odds. This has like at least 3 sequels and or prequels in the works in various times. Rome I Inc. I guess, which I guess is how we're going to say that, is going to be Diocletian to Heraclius, which is going to bring us into the Byzantine period. So that's going to be like the direct add-on sequel to this, and then there's a prequel that's the Roman Republic. So, which cool. I'm happy to buy all of those. This is very close to the top of the list of things I want to get on the table because honestly, because of Mr. President, I said this before. It's like this would be really cool, but it'd be cooler if you were a Roman emperor instead of the president. And this is kind of that game. It's not nearly as detailed, but the it nevertheless looks fairly interesting. It's certainly not as well presented. Um, I'm not sure this is really true. The Romans always liked assassinations. Okay, I mean, how many of those? There's a lot of assassinations. You got the Gracchi brothers, and you got Caesar is the obvious one. It's kind of amazing that Tiberius didn't get assassinated, but he was holed up on his island. Um, I mean, one can credibly surmise that Claudius got assassinated. Caligula got assassinated. Nero committed suicide. Um, but this was not exactly a rarity. Okay, even in the Republican period. So anyway, I have Nicaea as well, and I haven't played it, but that looks super interesting as well. A lot of misconceptions floating around because people are fucking stupid and listen to what they see on the internet and don't actually know what happened at the Council of Nicaea. But if you're one of those people that thinks, oh, they did all this stuff, a lot of people have misconceptions about what happened at the Council of Nicaea. The game is actually kind of neat. reflection of what actually happened at the Council of Nicaea. Now, it's also got a very satirical tone, and some people maybe don't appreciate that. I don't have a problem with that, and I am actually interested in this as a historical topic because I am interested in early history of early Christianity. I took a class on the history of early Christianity. So, all right, catching up on the chat here. There you go. Fantastic. If it wasn't going to cause problems with getting demonetized, I would totally have played either this clip or the the Latin one where he's got to write the Latin on the wall. That's just a hilarious line, especially if you've taken Latin. So interesting. If you could, I hesitate to draw too many conclusions from this, but yeah, you can justify. I mean, it's not like there's this Roman period that lasts for 1,000 years, and on day one, it's the same as it is on day 1,000 years, right? There's a lot of different cultural and political and military and technological things that change and evolve over the course of that period. Okay, so the Roman state and culture looks pretty different in 300 AD versus how it looked in 200 BC, right? But there is a continuity there, and there is some value in saying that the Roman civilization is still the basis of our civilization today, and that the Greek civilization was a basis for that. So my major was just history, actually, but I did take a decent amount of ancient stuff. I actually probably took more ancient stuff than anything else. That was not intentional, um, but it wasn't exactly accidental either. But I'm more interested in older at the time anyway. I was more interested in older history than newer history. Um, I'm Brian, and Sarah's my wife. There you go. I mean, this would be awesome, wouldn't it? Um, well, maybe not. I Claudius is a work of fiction, folks. Remember that. Lydia did it. So not quite confident that Robert Graves had the correct interpretation of some of those characters, but he certainly did a great job with a lot of them. If you haven't seen the BBC produced mini series, I Claudius, which does cover both books, I Claudius and Claudius the God, they are well worth your time. And I mean, it's all about Claudius, but it starts in the reign of Augustus rather than start right with Claudius. Claudius the God is pretty much the reign of Claudius. Um, but you get Augustus, you get Tiberius, you get Caligula, you get a little bit of Nero at the end. So ooh, HBO's Rome is pretty cool too. Um, very different from my Claudius though. Um, I Claudius takes the book. I've read the books too. Takes their its share of liberties with the history, less so than HBO's Rome, which takes liberties with history, which I expect. I mean, it's television, it's a popular medium, um, but also radically compresses the timeline of necessity because they got the same actors that look the same, um, that are playing the same characters 30 years later historically would be. So it's a great show. HBO's Rome is a great show too. And I think if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, you may be able to watch it for free. I could be wrong about that though. If we're talking about the Boris Johnson, I think we're talking about a bag of wet shit could get the better of Boris Johnson. So I'm just saying, not the sharpest knife in a silverware drawer. I got my brother watching HBO's Rome actually, and he is not a nerd at all. So that's very interesting. Yeah, Ray Stevenson did pass away recently, and he was great. That's probably my favorite character in the show. Ooh, okay, so he's definitely up there with favorite character in the show, but I think my favorite character in the show might have been the younger. Octavian. Um, he gets like magic advance aged at some point, either at the end of the first season or midway through the second season. And I didn't like the older actor playing him nearly as much as the kid. Now, the kid playing him is the same kid that played the ensign that gets his arm amputated in Master and Commander. I forget the kid's name, but he's really good, and he's terrific as Octavian. Um, and if this is the case, and I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying I haven't checked this anytime recently. That might be why it's the first season's better than the second season. The second season like speeds a lot of things up and mixes a lot of things up, and I wasn't as crazy. It's still good, but it wasn't quite as good. Um, so yeah, so the BBC's I Claudius has Derek Jacobi as Claudius, John as I think somebody mentioned John Hurt as Caligula. It's got Brian Blessed as Augustus, which is kind of an insane piece of casting right there. It's got Patrick Stewart as Sejanus. Um, it's got Cyan Phillips as Livia, who's fucking terrifying. And that's why she's so effective as the Reverend Mother in the 1984 Dune movie, too. It's like, wow, this is the same character. So it's really good, and there's a lot of faces you'll recognize in it. Let me put it that way. John Rhys Davies, I forget who he plays, but he's in it too. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know that anybody's expecting it to be an accurate documentary. But it's about it's a choice that's made to be about the historical events. In which case, we have to speed the timeline up. Um, the events of I Claudius are not about the historical events. It's really a character study of Claudius. And therefore, um, it works a little better without monkeying with the history directly. And it's a novel, and you can get away with that in a novel. And if on the BBC, if you need to age an actor up 20 years, you just powder their hair and send them right back onto the stage. I didn't see that, and a lot of other people didn't either, so I'm not sure. Does seem like there's a little more attention being paid to Master and Commander in recent years. Um, William Aaron says I Claudius is a teleplay full of Shakespearean dialogue rather than a swords and sandals action epic. That's totally true, totally accurate. Uh, and yeah, uh, and yes, it got HBO's Rome got basically canceled because it was too expensive, even though it was like a co-production with either an Italian or a British and Italian co-company. Even with that, it was just too expensive for the ratings they were getting. I mean, it's not like it's the only good show that HBO ever canceled. That's not the case either. Carnival was friggin' brilliant. Boy, it took a while to get going, but once it got going, it was like, whoo, wow, this is great. And it got canceled after 2 years. We got some closure at the end of the second season of that. And yeah, this is a intense death scene. I agree with that actually. Yeah, so the interesting thing is the BBC has just got all that shit sitting around anyway. You want some togas? No problem. We got a call A full of friggin' togas. So, it's not like they got to spend a bunch of money on costumes. And most of those actors were not like known people at the time, even though they are now. Some of them were, but even so. This was pretty cool, actually. That first battle scene in the first episode. So Ray Stevenson is in the new Star Wars show that will be premiering this month, Ahsoka, which I will probably watch. I don't know if I'll like. I feel like the some of the material that they've been doing for Star Wars on the Disney Channel, I feel like it's hit and miss. I guess the good news is that when it's been hit, and by hit I mean Andor, it's been fucking amazing. The Boba Fett show was not very good. The Obi-Wan show was okay. The Mandalorian kind of floats up and down. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's 100% fan service, and it feels like it's there for the fan service some of the time, and I don't like that. So, so John, it's funny you should mention this because they're literally making Gladiator 2 right now. Literally. So, mm, I don't know if nobody watched it. I mean, I saw some people who felt like it was just too slow, and I appreciate that it was slow, but I appreciate that it was slow. It did more to bring some feel of reality to that ridiculous universe than anything else that anybody has ever done. I said at the time that this is a wig. This is totally a wig. Um, I said at the time this is the best Star Wars in Star Wars, and I think that's correct. As much as I love The Empire Strikes Back, I think you got to credit Star Wars for initiating the whole idea. But beyond that, I think Andor is the best thing that has ever occurred in that franchise. It is slow, and man, it's good. It's just really great. The music is really great. It doesn't feel like a Star Wars musically. It doesn't tonally. It's very different from everything else that they've done. It is really exceptionally well done. And I don't think it particularly leans on. I mean, I've seen Rogue One, which I liked, but you could tell Rogue One is a bit of a Frankenstein of we had this director and he made some of the movie, and then we fired him and got somebody else, and then we rewrote the script, and then we did a bunch of edits after test screenings, and you can really kind of see the stitching in Rogue One. At the end of the day, I think it's a pretty good movie that came out of that. Andor doesn't have any of that. It's like the one guy has just written the whole thing and has been in charge, and it was terrific. So, I mean, I float between these services anyway, right? I sign up for one, watch a bunch of stuff for a couple of months, and then cancel it and sign up for something else. So, yes, and that's absolutely vital in based on the premise of the show, right? It's about Andor and how he goes from being this bozo to Andor that you see in Rogue One. So, and frankly, I mean, I know there's only going to be they were going to do like 5 seasons, and now it's only going to be two, and I found that disappointing because I'd have watched 5 seasons of this very happily. So, yeah, this was in uh, Nicholas. This wasn't Nicholas in Alexandria. This or was it? Maybe it was. I remember this. He is actually a pretty good Lennon, actually. So, yeah, I remember seeing as Perfidious Albion mentioned. There's a bunch of these old BBC Shakespeare's that we had access to at college, and Patrick Stewart was in a bunch of those. He was was it Claudius? I think he played Claudius in Hamlet, for example. So I didn't think She-Hulk was worse than any of the other couple of things. I generally haven't been thrilled with the Marvel shows. Um, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was decent. I thought She-Hulk was okay. I'm not sure what else I've seen. I didn't get through all of Moon Knight. Um, uh, the Scarlet Witch one, WandaVision was okay. Um, but then I felt like they ruined it by then going back and covering the same fucking material in the Doctor Strange movie. So, yes, this is true. Leon de Grance of Cameliard in Excalibur, and it's a small but memorable role too. Mm. I'm forgetting Loki. Actually, I may think I'd have to think harder about this, and I haven't given this no thought. I think Loki might be the best of the Marvel shows. I might be wrong. But it's a favorite character anyway. And there's a Rome relevant scene in the first in in season 1, where they go back in time to ancient Rome and Mount Vesuvius is about to explode, and Loki jumps on the cart and starts speaking in Latin to the people to tell them that the volcano is going to explode. And it turns out that that was something that Tom Hiddleston could just do because he took Greek and Latin in school. So um I've watched yes, Fall of Eagles. This is like this massive multi-part series where it kind of parallels the fall of um the Romanovs and the Habsburgs and the Hohens, the German people. So it's interesting and very long. So I've watched the Infinity War and Endgame like multiple times a piece. And probably the first Captain America multiple times and probably the first Avengers a couple of times. They're not all equally rewatchable. Yeah, I don't know. It just didn't really work for me. I like Oscar Isaac. Oscar Isaac's been good in a bunch of stuff, but he was good in the one of the best things in the sequel trilogy. I mean, the actors themselves were pretty much the best thing about the sequel trilogy. Whoever they had writing it should have been gone to a different project. Let me put it that way. We did not make this. I couldn't. I normally I shoot for something like 20 or 22 games, and I hit that limit. So we didn't cover Caesar Epic Battle of Elysia, which is the Avalon Hill Caesar at Elysia. And nor did we cover the GBOH Elysia, which I understand has some problems. I'd still kind of like to try it. The other interesting one in that series is Caesar in Alexandria, which was mentioned in the chat. That's an ancient. So it's when I say it's an ancient city fight, don't get the impression that you got like the Stalingrad map where this whole map is just Alexandria. It's not. It's a little section of the map, but you still get like ancient street to street city fighting, which is something that you just don't see. So God, I was unable. I tried to rewatch Life Force about a year or two ago, and I'm like, man, I can't even watch this. This is fucking boring. I think I fell asleep actually. Um, and I don't remember how um I don't remember how I thought. I think I do actually remember how I thought it was more interesting back in the day when I was 13 when I saw it, if you know what I mean. So I did not get through Ex Machina. That's probably slightly embarrassing, but I did not get through Ex Machina. All right, folks, we are out of time. So I would like to say once again that you can subscribe to the channel. If you're not subscribed already, thumbs up the video if you've enjoyed watching tonight. If you want to do more to help support the channel, there's links to do that in the video description. All the support is appreciated. So thank you, patrons, and everybody else who comes out and watches and participates in the chat and all that stuff. Thank you so much for coming by. We will be back next week with a new show. On Thursday, we have an unboxing and we have a special show with some special guests that's outside of the Thursday show with Dan. And I don't know exactly when that's going to happen yet, so I can't tell you when it's going to happen, but it should be pretty exciting when it happens. So stay tuned. And we do have coming up in the next couple of weeks, probably 2 to 3 weeks is my guess. The big special giveaway, which you really want to be here for because it's really good. So everybody, thanks for coming out tonight, and we'll see you all next time.